Should you visit Ecuador in 2025? There's an easy yes or no answer that I'm going to give in this video, but I'm also going to explain why the easy answer is not always the correct answer for everyone, as well as give the critically important context that might modify that answer for some people. And of course, in the end, I'll give you my final and personal thoughts on the whole situation. So to start with, let's understand what your purpose of coming to Ecuador is. If you're coming for tourism, then my easy answer for you is that you should visit Ecuador. I've said it once, but I'll say it again. Ecuador is an amazing and beautiful country, and it's relatively cheap, especially considering how expensive things are in other parts of the world. You tell me of a place where you can get a dish as good as encebollado, which comes with plantain chips and can fill you up by itself, for $2 or less. Go on, I'm waiting. Nothing? That's what I thought. Similarly, for people who want to live in Ecuador, my easy answer is also a yes. You should come live in Ecuador in 2025. In addition to the beauty and the low cost of living here in Ecuador, the people are some of the nicest people you will ever meet. But now, if you were rational enough to watch until this part of the video, then you know that the answer is never as easy as just yes or no, regardless of the people who want you to believe that a quick explanation is all that you need. So let's talk about the main issues that will affect short-term visitors of Ecuador, as well as people looking to live in Ecuador for the long run. To start with, there's the energy crisis. The last part of 2024 was plagued with planned blackouts due to the droughts and the poor planning from the government. The rationing, which at its peak was at 14 hours a day, has finally gone down and actually continues to go down. Next week, there will only be 3 hours of rationing, and the president has already declared that rationing will end in December. Now, if something about what you just heard sounds off, then I'm glad you're paying attention. Bonus points for anyone who realized that there were two things that were off there. The first thing is the fact that we're already in December and we still have planned blackouts. Now, no, I'm not going to be a complete idiot, nor am I going to be a sheep. And what I mean by that is that I do realize that when they say December, it can be any day of December, not specifically the 1st of December. But in that same way, I'm not going to let it slide that it would have been easier to say reduced outages in December instead of no outages in December. And this goes hand in hand with the other thing that was off, which is basically just making false promises. Last month, when I made my energy crisis PSA, we were promised a gradual reduction in the outages. We all know how that turned out. As a tourist, the problem that the lack of energy or the uncertainty of energy might cause is that you'll need to find a place that has a generator, since of course you'll want to have power at the place that you're staying at, I assume. As both a tourist and someone looking to live here, you might be inconvenienced by the noise from all the generators running, as well as the smell and the possible health effects from the emissions from all these generators. Another thing that will affect people looking to visit and live in Ecuador is the situation with the phone service here in the country. I recently talked about how bad it's been for me having a national phone service since the internet access was almost non-existent when I needed it. And boy, have I needed it. You could use your country's international phone service, but I've seen some that charge $10 daily, and yikes, that would definitely be quite expensive. That's why I'd recommend having an international eSIM app such as Saily before coming, so that you can avoid that problem altogether, or at least have a way to make a claim in case something does go wrong. Not to mention, it's definitely cheaper than $10 daily. I'll leave a link to Saily in the description of this video, so that you can check it out yourself. But now we have the other big problem, and that's the internal armed conflict. While a lot of the news about this has been highly overshadowed by the energy crisis, that does not mean that this conflict is over. There is still increased crime in the form of thievery, violent deaths, kidnappings, and extortion occurring all over the country, and there does not seem to be an immediate end in sight. For tourists or people visiting in general, this might not mean much if you're cautious and use common sense. This typically means, but is not limited to, not flashing items that are appealing to thieves, not staying out until late, and of course, not going to places that are not touristic sites, unless you're accompanied by an Ecuadorian. If you're looking for some people to guide you, then my guides of choice are Luis from Build Up Tours and Darwin Paredes. Their contact information will be in the description of this video. If you need help in the Manabí region, specifically Manta or Puerto Viejo, then send me an email and we'll see what we can do. If you really want to use tech and are concerned about the theft of your tech, since that does seem to be the main thing that thieves target here, then consider getting Safety Wing insurance, since they do offer electronics theft protection, which covers laptops, cameras, and tablets for up to $1,000. And as for people coming to live in Ecuador, depending on where you decide to live, caution will become your new way of life. But it's also very important to remember that normally nothing will happen if you're not involved. In other words, the people who truly have to worry are the people who are involved with cartels, the people who are involved with drugs or borrowing money, and unfortunately the people who have successful businesses. So basically, if you're not any of those people, then you should be fine. That's not to say that you could be in the wrong place at the wrong time, like being in an area where there's an assassination attempt about to happen. But that's literally just a matter of coincidence, and you're equally likely to slip on a banana peel as you are to finding yourself in a situation like that. But all this leads to my opinion, which is based on the reality of what I live through and see on a day-to-day basis. And to start with, sometimes it's hard to believe what the government is telling you because they tell you one thing and end up doing another. And sometimes it's just they do things that don't make sense. All of this is why even with the announcement of the reduction of the blackouts in December, I had to wait until December to make this video in case that ended up being false, like when we were promised the reduced outages and ended up getting more. It's also why I'm skeptical about the current announcement of the end of the blackouts, since it could end in December and then return in January or later, if or when there's no rainfall. And to add more things that we worry about over here, there's even an election cycle coming up. So who knows if this is all just a show to improve approval ratings. And there's a whole conversation to be had about the planning that was required and that will be required in order to improve the energy crisis in Ecuador. But that is definitely a big topic that we'll talk about at a later date, so make sure you're subscribed for when that video comes out. And then there's the whole crime situation, which is always difficult to talk about, especially when it's not you who it directly happens to. But that's not to say that these situations don't hit close to home. I already know of one person who was extorted during these times, and unfortunately I also recently found out about an ex-student of mine who went through a kidnapping, and it unfortunately did not end up well. But even through all that, an energy crisis, crime, the economy which seems to get worse every day, people still keep doing what they have to do. And that's not just for Ecuadorians or people living here. There are people who still come to Ecuador, people who visit. I get messages from people telling me that they came to Ecuador and everything was fine. I see messages on Facebook or on groups where people say that they visited Ecuador and everything went amazingly. So there's still the possibility to visit Ecuador as long as you take the precautions and you come prepared. Tourism should definitely not be affected by all of this as long as you do your due diligence. And even for people coming to live here, the situation still somehow ends up being better over here than it is in other countries, even countries like the United States, especially with what I hear about cost of living, which in the States has become just absolutely terrible, and other things which you will have to explain to me in the comments, because I just don't understand how we, as Ecuadorians, people living here, can want to leave this country to the States because we think it's better, and yet there are people from the States coming to Ecuador because they say the situation is better over here than it is over there. And really, all of this just shows that the time that you're gonna have here will either be good or bad, depending on you. Will you let blackouts stress you out? Are you smart enough to avoid crime? Is the situation in your country that terrible that coming to live here is that much better? What exactly do you want from Ecuador? All of this, as well as a little bit of luck, is going to decide the time that you have here. Luck and planning, of course, are vital for temporary visitors, but for those who come to live in Ecuador, I highly recommend waiting until after January to see what the energy situation is like, and maybe even after February to see what happens after the election. Or just come now and tough it out here with all of us. So when you come, I hope that you have a great time, and also let me know how it went, and make sure to tell everyone else how it went, so that way everyone can see what the situation is like over here. Thank you to channel members and Buy Me a Coffee members for supporting the channel. I always appreciate it. Take care, and as always, Ace out.